One point I want to make, I don't know if you remember 4 years ago, I called you on WNTA, you're on the air, and I said, why don't you pick an arbitrary date 2 years from now and say, we are no longer going to have a city police department, say, the county, you take it, it's yours. And at the time, you were fairly new and you said, well, that's a silly idea. So how do you feel about that now?
It's amazing what you learn in a couple years.
Now, in a bigger picture,
two things.
Let me just say one thing. In a bigger picture, I mean, you talk about smaller government, I think everybody in this room is for smaller government, but we need to make government bigger to make it smaller. We need one county government. We have 16 police departments in Winnebago County. We have all these townships, we have all these cities, we have all this redundancy, and we need to stop it, and that needs to be our focus. My last point, and then I'm done. Why don't your administration just file about 20 lawsuits in federal court, not state court, and say, enough, Rockford, Illinois is not taking this anymore, and stop these arbitration rulings, and stop these unions in federal court, let it go to the Supreme Court. It's going to cost us money in the short run, to save us millions of dollars in the long run, and the best defense is a great offense, and I think we should look at that.
Well, two very good questions. One, first talking about the idea of metro government. You know, I love this. It's an attractive thing to think that we would gain efficiency and effectiveness by merging. But I just point to one area where there was a ton of mergers over the years in Rockford, and point out and ask the question whether you think it worked. School districts. School district absorbed a number of different smaller areas over the years and decades. And I would say today the real problem is it's hard to run a central operation with 30,000 students in it and be as effective and reflective of what the needs are for an individual school building. Now the alternative is, as opposed to just metro government, hey, we'd have to change state law again, I think, to be able to do it here. The opportunity is, without having to go to the Springfield, we can do an intergovernmental agreement. And my philosophy is you'll see us starting to move in this direction. Old model, centralized bureaucracy, everything had to go up through the chief. New model, redeploy, get the teams out into the community. We're trying to decentralize into sub-districts for running our police department, where we're going to be a heck of a lot more engaged with the community around us. Now, we kind of do that in a way with the fire department. We have fire department, fire stations. You know, the firefighters aren't located over at City Hall. You know, the work isn't to be, by the way, at City Hall these days, you go to a lot of floors, there's a lot of emptiness. We may have it on the sales or auction block, you know, in the next few years. I'm kind of joking, but only kind of. Because the real work, as you're saying, is out there in the community. Now, the partnership we may be able to reach with the county, I'm not right now in favor of just handing the keys to the sheriff of Winnebago County, because I know what I've had to do to fight to make cultural changes inside our organization. I don't know if they've got it done there yet. And some of the latest discussions, you know, in the newspaper about on both, you know, on both sides of that issue, I think lend some of the credence to that being an issue. What we can do is an intergovernmental agreement that might say, between the city and the county, why we have redundant coverage on Guilford Country Club Estates. I use that as an example because it's actually not Rockford. It's completely surrounded by Rockford, but it's a pocket of county government that if there's a fire there, it's not Rockford Fire going to it. If there's a crime there, it's not Rockford Police going to it. It doesn't make any sense to me. We have a lot more efficiencies that we can gain, and we can do it through some intergovernmental agreements, partnering with the county. But I've said this to my command staff. I have no illusion suggesting that we're the only ones who can do this job. And I'll give you one example where we're outsourcing right now law enforcement capacity. Parades, special events. It was the gravy train of all jobs you could possibly do at the city, just about. You got the PIS all overtime. And by contract, doing on the waterfront, 4th of July, those types of events, they were earning double time, not time and a half, double time. And who gets to pick to do those jobs? On the waterfront, just about everybody was working. But in the other cases, it's seniority. So your highest paid people are getting paid double to do the easiest job on, oh yeah, this is number one rule in the playbook for what's going on over there. So we're outsourcing now that work. Our plan is to do it next year to some private security firms, including potentially one of the government agencies around our town that can do it cheaper. Parades and special events work, somebody else should do it if they can do it cheaper, and there's a lot of other areas like that.
Mayor, could you just give a 30-second answer to the Supreme Court thing so I want to get through as many people as possible.
Supreme Court, you know, believe me, I am, as the guy who used to practice law on a daily basis, we've had our legal department very, 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 very busy. We've had lawsuits, I would argue probably more than any administration in decades against the union, maybe ever, trying to fight issues. Now, we haven't won them all, but I agree with you. We got to start playing offense. And what has happened historically, you know, I'm part of the Illinois Municipal League. That's the group that I said I don't know if I finished my thought on it. I think I was the only mayor in that group pushing for an Illinois Constitutional Convention to try to change some of the insanity of our state current rules. But what I've said is the same thing. We got to push. Now, I've thought about the federal side, but what I've been told is we don't really have a dog to hunt because the federal government has essentially given all the authority to that to the states, you know, through our Constitution. The states are independent and sovereign bodies. Now, the only way we'd, I think, have a strong constitutional argument is if we first have to make the change in Springfield. And if then they argue that we were violating a federal law, then we get to raise the issue of our state sovereignty to govern ourselves. But right now, municipalities only exist, we don't exist in the state constitution, except to be we're a legislative fact. You know, by the way, this we have thought about. If we were to go out of business, right, we couldn't pay our bonds, couldn't pay our cops, firemen, we would hand the keys to the county and say, it's yours. Because that's what happens in unincorporated areas of the community. Working with us, and there's some goal to become a more efficient organization. Now, when you start talking about the word sustainability by itself, there's a whole lot of other, you know, stuff that people might try to associate with it. And what I can tell you, what we're trying to do locally is become the most efficient and effective government. But I would say that the key that we have to do is let policy decisions be made by our community as a whole, our citizens. Policy level decisions about how we grow and how we use our energy shouldn't be made in the back room by a developer and an alderman or a mayor or whomever. Those policy level decisions about how we build, what we look like, you know, when you want to start spending money on a road, start talking to an engineer about the details of lane widths. You know, it may not mean much to you, but the difference between a 13-foot and a 15-foot lane, when you're adding miles of concrete, it's a lot of money. And so some of the folks that have been pushing for these, what I would call ridiculous standards, and how we build our built environment, because they make money off of it, a lot of money off of it. Instead, we should take a look at, you know, the way a lot of cities were designed and run 150 years ago. They had to be sustainable. Then they have all this money, right? They had to be efficient. They had to partner with their community. And my commitment is to end this fight, which has been essentially the people versus the pros, the professional bureaucrats, firefighters, teachers. They sometimes will say, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. They don't want citizens engaged. They like it when people are totally ignorant on all these rules. My pledge to you is to create a much more engaging environment. It's a lot of work, because if your civic muscles have atrophied, because we didn't teach you in school about local government. I don't know about you, I didn't learn anything in school about city council, school boards. I had to take a federal constitution test, which meant nothing because it was just a piece of paper. What means something is knowing how to change your local government, how to ultimately connect to all these major policy level decisions that I would say have been robbed.
We're getting an awesome education from you right now, and I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. What are you as a mayor going to do to give back to the people to relax on them when we're in a tight budget crunch and you're feeding us stuff?
Two things, and I think it's a great question. You know, that ultimately goes to, and I'll piggyback on a little bit of what I said a moment ago. Ultimately, these questions about how we govern ourselves need to have the absolute tie-in to what our citizens want. The quality and the standards, you know, I'll give you two specific examples of things we changed. Some might call it more regulation since I got elected, but to me it's been making the rules effective. We had a rule set long before I became mayor about loud car stereos, right? Totally ineffective. it wasn't working, we added a regulation that said, because people were going, you've seen the amount of unpaid bills over at the courthouse, people being fined, not paying their bill, loud stereo ordinance and scofflaws. It was, and I get it, and you know, sometimes from my own wife about complaining about the guy in the loud stereo next door to us when we're driving down the street. But we had a huge, huge problem. We tracked it. We monitor all those calls for service related to the loud stereos. What we put in place is a rule that says if you get pulled over for that crime, or it's an ordinance violation, we're going to impound your car. Guess what? When you add a $100 fee to get your car back, it encourages a lot of people to turn their radio down. Now, on the homes, another one that we had a rule that said you can't park your car on the lawn. Now, if people want to be able to park their cars on the lawn, then go to city council and change the rule. But we had the rule on the books. We just weren't really, you know, this was absurd. You could be an owner of a piece of property as a landlord, and the tenant puts the car on the lawn, and guess who was getting the call? The landlord. And so the day before the hearing, the landlord would come in, and the hearings would take forever. The landlord would say, see, the car's moved. And what would happen? The fine would go away, the loan goes away. And then the next day, the person parks the car back in the lawn. Well, you know, this is not rocket science, by the way. What did we do? We changed it so that if you got a car parked on the lawn, $100 ticket. Guess what? We don't have cars parked on the lawns anymore. So, I guess what I'm saying is this.
That is an argument over property rights, too.
Absolutely. But what I would say is this. The Constitution allows for restrictions on property rights. There's no absolute, because ultimately, when I took property, our professor used to call it the bundle of sticks. Property or rights are a series of different types of rights. And what we ultimately have to decide is, what do we want to do as a local community? A lot of times the rules aren't controlled by us, they're Springfield or Washington. But when it comes to property rights, there's a lot we can do locally. And I would say this, it's a democracy. If you want to see a rule changed, then we can take a look at changing it. But in my opinion, is this. What we had a real problem with before I elected was totally unfair and inconsistent application of the rules. We still sometimes have a problem with that. So what you'll see us doing at our Rockstead meetings a lot of times is we're troubleshooting, we're auditing, we're finding out how are we doing on enforcement of the rules. If we want to change a rule, it's the conversation that has to include the whole group here.